Hi, and welcome to our episode 1000. This episode creates a pretty special milestone, and for this celebration, I've invited two of our regular guests to tell us a bit more about them, their childhood, and what they learned from each other. Now, these two guests are Andrew and Jonna McLean, which of course they're brothers. Some of these stories are extraordinary, living on King Island, chasing down kangaroos, and also the challenge of getting feathers from low-flying emus as they chase them down on their ponies. I hope you enjoy this episode as much as I did. Now, for people who don't know Andrew and Jonna, you probably haven't listened to Horse Chats much because Andrew was number 3. So he was on very early and he's been on a couple of times since then. And Jonna's been on 28 times. So well done, both of you, for coming together for our 1000th episode.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. You must be sick of Jonna by now.
Oh no! Well, if he didn't always have interesting stuff to talk about, I probably would be. But he's always got something different that's always interesting, and I'm sure today will be interesting as
It was
well.
a good try, though, Andrew.
All right. Now you've got two other brothers, haven't you? Is it Peter and Alice
Yeah.
there? Yep.
I'm number 2, Jonna's number 3, and Peter, our older brother, lives on King Island, and Nigel, our youngest brother, he lives here in Victoria.
So, did you start riding early? How old were you when you started?
Oh, we come from quite a long line of horse people, so probably there are not many families, maybe the Ryans and the Roycrofts, who have that common thread in their backgrounds, because our grandfather was a show jumper in Queensland back in the day when you
I
went
know,
to
I've seen a photo of him, and I
Yeah.
thought you'd probably look at that photo and it was a pretty good photo for back then, but you might look at it now and say, we could have fixed his position up just a little bit.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the dog was practically 6 feet, and the horse was only 14 too.
Oh, wow. I didn't know the horse was small.
That would test the mettle of any event rider riding a horse that small into a fence that large.
With one arm. I think Heath Ryan did that back in at Melbourne 3-day event when he broke his arm on and still rode in the cross country when he had a broken arm. But not many have ridden with one arm.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, and our parents were both very much into it. Our father was a show jumper as well, and our mother was a well-known, well, you call it show rider, but she was really a dressage rider before they had dressage here in Australia. And so they used to do educated hack classes at Melbourne and Sydney Royal, and that was sort of her thing. So she read a book by Henry Wynne Mullen called Dressage, I think it is,
Oh, wow. Yeah.
and just basically trained a horse out of that.
Yep.
And
Yep.
then, as I said, our brothers are into. Oh, actually, Peter is and was as a very good jockey. He's hung up his boots now.
Yep. And you had a very good story about Nigel and why he doesn't ride.
Yeah, well, Nigel was actually pretty. When we got home from school on King Island, we were with friends who lived nearby as well. We'd chase kangaroos. We rode bareback, and we chased kangaroos around the coast hills on King Island where we lived. And Nigel used to come with us, sometimes double dinking. He wasn't actually over keen on bareback going double dinking because he was only 3 or 4. He had a horse called Fats, which actually belonged to a friend of ours. And then one day Fats came home and Nigel walked home, and Nigel said Fats bucked him off, but we knew Fats didn't do that. He got off and sent the horse home, and then when he got home, he said to our mother, he said, "Oh, Mum, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to ride horses." And she said, "Well, what do you want to do, Nigel?" And he said, "Well, I want to fish." And so he went fishing when we were chasing kangaroos and went catching squid down in the rocks, and that was it. And then he became an aquaculture guy.
Okay. Now, what brought your parents to King Island?
Oh, you can answer that, Andrew.
Jonna can cut in where he feels like it, but basically we were brought up with quite a bit of money, and our father and grandfather owned the farm, and our father was an engineer, and he stopped farming, and our grandfather got him involved and bought him a place to make parts for bulldozers, rollers, and he was machining those, and we were doing well until about 1965 or so, or 6, and then the Japanese people, manufacturers came into the market and made parts much cheaper than he could.
Yep.
He never really read the writing on the wall, and so we just basically lost everything. We moved to King Island for that reason, and it was the best move we ever did. Jonna would agree with that.
Oh, absolutely. I think it was fantastic. You know, Dad, he was such an inventor all the way throughout childhood. He was building his unicycles and things. He was always such a great creator of anything to do with your hands, especially when it involved metal. And so, you know, we moved to King Island, and Dad was then one of the mechanics and a diesel mechanic and a fitter, all those things for King Island dairy products. So,
It became the cheese factory.
Wow, wow. It sounds like a dream childhood, you're just thinking chasing kangaroo, dream for anyone that loves horses, that particularly that doesn't have one.
well, it was. Our house was probably, would only have been 3 kilometres from the ocean. We could see the ocean out of our kitchen
Wow.
window. So
Yep,
we spent
yep.
all the time around water and the beach the entire time. It was you couldn't wish for a better upbringing. You really couldn't, not for anyone.
You know, it was fantastic. For me, I knew I wanted to be a zoologist from very young, and so being near the ocean was just fantastic because we had a really prolific, rocky shoreline with so many things, and we'd go skin diving. We could catch crayfish with a Hawaiian sling, and there were stingrays and all sorts of animals there. It was quite fantastic, and peacocks all over the island. So they were really fun to chase on a horse too because they flew about the speed of a galloping pony, but they flew about the height of one as well. So you could actually catch them get a few tail feathers if you were good enough on a straight line.
Yeah.
I was going to ask you about starting riding, but it seems like you started riding, when you got to King Island. Did you ride before then?
Yeah.
Yeah, because Mum started Labatouche Pony Club because she was so into it.
That's right.
I mean, they were really there in the very start of that sort of, there were a lot of pony clubs arising. So I was in pony club at the age of 3, and then we just kept on riding until the wheels fell off our family fortune, and we went to King Island. Then we got back into it again there.
Now, how did you get the ponies there? Because I know you can't take a ferry. Did you fly them there, or are they already there?
They all always have to arrive by ship, so they come in a little container.
Oh, okay. So it's just the public that can't go by ship.
That's right.
But the horse that I had when I was young, and then I handed it to Jonna, was a homebred horse. He was bred on King Island. His mother, I believe he was the first offspring from a mare that was the first one tamed from a wild herd in the north of King Island called the Manana Estate. And the legend was that these horses, the ancestors, swam ashore from a shipwreck. King Island's loaded with shipwrecks. I think
Yep.
it's more than any other per kilometre than any other coastline in the country.
Okay.
Our houses at school on King Island and still are named after shipwrecks, Bronzewing and Cataraqui.
That's right. Exactly.
So he was homebred and a trotting stallion jumped the fence.
Okay.
And that's how he came about. He had a very strange gait, but we didn't know any different because if you don't know any different, we didn't use a saddle much with him, but he had so, like a terrier, when you look from behind, terriers sometimes lift one leg up when they canter. Well, he did that. It was hilarious when I took him to Launceston and Hobart shows, and they wonder how on earth this horse could jump. But he was a really good jumper. He went from D grade right through really fast to much faster than I was prepared for. That, yeah. And then Donna rode him in the Pony Club trials.
Yeah, that's right. And he was such a good jumper that, of course, when Andrew had already done eventing with him, and then he lent him to me, and all we had to do was suffer the dressage, and we were right because I don't think the judges could tell which gate we were actually in.
Yeah.
No,
It
I
was a
think
little
out of the 112 horses in the Pony Club trials, year I rode him, and I don't think it was a whole lot better for Jonna.
No.
That year I was 110th in the dressage, and 111th and 112 must have been really bad.
Yes, that's right.
And he didn't have great steering. So when Jonna rode him in the Pony Club trials in Devonport, these are A-grade trials. It was the top level that we were trying to 10 spread fence. In those days, they were fairly tough courses. Anyway, I'm watching Jonna riding Sam, his name was Saracen, but we called him Sam. I was watching Jonna riding Sam, and next thing, Sam's taken the bit in his own mind and took off out of the course and through the car.
Through the car park, and then we emerged out of the car park and did a bit of a loop around the car park, and then just continued on our merry way to finish
Yeah,
the
and then remember he stopped at this wide fence that had rails on either side. And it was a walkway with wooden planks on the bottom.
That's
And
right.
you could either walk up it or jump it. And Jonna said, I would jump it for sure because he was a good jumper.
Yeah.
But he stopped suddenly, and Jonna hung around his neck, and he's hanging on by his legs upside down
Uh-huh.
on the sidelines yelling, "Don't get off! Don't fall!" Because he would get
Yep, yep.
60 penalties if he came off. So he took him
Absolutely.
about a minute, and he clambered back up onto the horse, and then had
I
another go,
didn't touch the ground.
hopped over it.
And that was at Bernie Trials. And when he went through the car park, that was Devonport. That's right.
Yeah, yeah,
But
yeah.
just an amazing horse that just saw so many things. He'd been so many places. So he was transported off the island for trials in one of these little crates and put on the deck of a ship, and then transported all day across.
Jumped out. Remember, he jumped out.
And then he jumped out. That's right. He jumped out on his arrival to King Island, and we had to fix his legs up before the trial qualifications. That's right.
He
Yeah, yeah.
lacerated his leg quite badly.
Mm,
One
mm.
year, it wasn't the year of the trials because he wouldn't have been able to do it. It must have been some other event.
You'd sent him over to me, and I had to qualify for the trials on him on King Island when it happened.
Yeah, they only had a rope. They had a loop rope around their necks while they were in these crates, and Sam wouldn't have a bar of that. So once the ship got going, and it was a barge, it wasn't a proper ship, so he was on deck, and yeah, he thought he'd jump out, and I think he must have half strangled himself from whatever doing. But he was a really tough horse, and then yeah, he came good, but wasn't made keen on those open crates.
No,
No,
no.
Eh? Terrifying,
Yeah,
terrifying.
yeah. I love that. I mean, I've chatted to both of you a number of times before. I've never ever heard that story, so I love this that you're getting together and reminding yourself about stories. Now, I want you to think because you would have ridden when you were fairly young, but you would have had, like you get a vivid memory, a memory of when you were young. I think my memory was we were at the beach and we would have been pretty young because my mother's friend was pregnant and her daughter is only like 3 years max, 2.5, 3 years younger than me. So I would have been fairly young to have this memory. And I had the memory we were at the beach, but at a calm water beach. It must have been like Sandgate or something. And there was a dead fish there.
Hmm.
And we'd walk out, we'd be looking for this half dead fish, and then we'd see the fish and scream and run back into the beach, and then we'd go out and do it again, walking, see the dead fish and run back in. And if I think about my first vivid memory, that was my first vivid memory, nothing to do with horses, but when you're young, you have vivid memories, you just remember, yes. What about you, Jonna? What did you have as your first vivid memory of riding?
Well, I've got two vivid memories, and I think it was probably first vivid memory was probably learning to jump, and Andrew and Brett were down on the floodplain with me, and me jumping my first jump, and I remember it feeling so exhilarating. And the next exhilarating experience for me was probably my first race, which was a hack race, and Andrew did hack races as well on King Island. And the other things are probably the most unusual jumps that I've ever jumped in my life. And one of them was a hanging rope, was a giant rope hanging between two trees, just swinging in the breeze. We had to jump that.
In between, you had to jump in the noose.
The
Jump
necklace.
over the
Wow.
rope. Yep. That was just swinging. And then the other one was 44-gallon drums just suspended, bobbing up and down in a dam. You had to jump them as well. That was in our cross country. And then the other one was a dead whale carcass. So jumped some pretty unusual jumps.
It was a sperm whale, and it had its spinal processes sticking up, and
That's
it
right.
really was really big,
Yeah.
long, I should say. So
Yep.
it made quite a nice jump, and you could have the little kids jump the tail part, and then
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
it was
Okay.
big at the
Yeah.
other end. Yeah.
Yep.
So they were the things, and probably going really fast made, put obviously that sort of memory in my mind through my adrenaline that I thought, this is just marvellous. I've never been so fast in my life.
Yep.
It's great.
Yep.
So we both really got stuck into the eventing, I think, because of those. Loved galloping. It was just so much fun.
And the challenge, you walk the courses and you think, and there are people around you and they'd say, oh, it's really wet and really slippery. I don't know. I like this jump. And you think, I've practiced this. This is okay. This is, this is fine. Yeah.
Yep. Yep.
King Island
Yep.
was good for us in that way too, because I mean it could have turned really bad because they didn't really have much care for safety. So we could at the race meetings, every race meeting on King Island in those days in the 70s and probably just 70s had a hack race at the end for kids, and the rule was your horse it could be a thoroughbred, but it had to be grass fed. But who was really watching? Ours certainly were, and it was bareback. And we weren't the only ones that did it. There were heaps of kids on King Island that some really impressive riders. I remember a guy called Tim Clark. This is just on King Island, but he could canter in a circle standing on the horse's rump.
Oh, wow.
Amazing stuff. Amazing stuff.
I often think back to any of those riders could have been a really top rider
Yep,
if they
yep,
chose
yep.
to or wanted to be.
And there was lots of them on the island, and we all just took it for granted that we all had these skills. But then later on in life, you realise, wow, that was an exceptional experience.
And Peter Clark became really, really well known in this country for his work with the water.
Aqua Walker with and black caviar, you see.
Yeah, that's right.
I spent many years with Peter. We used to take horses to Hong Kong and racing, breaking in horses for the Hong Kong Jockey Club. And so I worked with Peter for quite a few years, transporting horses, breaking them in here at Ngambie, and then pre-training them, and then putting them on a plane as sub-2-year-olds, and then taking them over to breeze up for the Hong Kong Jockey Club, in which case then they go through the international sale. So I did that for...
And that was quite an experience, that one, wasn't it, for you, John? You did it a few times, I think.
I did that, and Warwick came with me on one of those early trips as well. So, unique exposures that you don't hear of those sorts of stories now.
Mm-hmm. Is that what you started in racing, do you think?
No. It was my brother. My brother Peter got me started in racing. Yeah, he said, "Oh, I know where there's a job going, and if you muck out stables for this amount of time, you might be able to ride one of the racehorses and gallop it along a beach." That was it. I was in. No
Yeah,
worries.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
and his name was Danny Howard for the Hamers, and so I used to finish school and go and muck out stables, and then I get to go and ride track work, and that involved riding the horse over the sand dunes and then galloping along the beach and then riding all the way home. You're on the horse's back for probably 2 hours. But marvellous fitness training for the horses. And that was so exhilarating. It was just, even now, I get little quivers up my spine thinking how fantastic that was. And then you get the chance to either see the horse race, and in some cases later on, I got the chance to ride those horses that I'd trained in a race. And that was even better. That was the clincher.
Yeah, and Peter, our older brother, he was a very good jockey. He was one of the top jockeys in his time and was second top apprentice in Victoria in his time. PJ McLean, he was known as. And he really got me going, and I think Jonna too, in riding shorter.
That's right.
I rode very short in cross-country eventing, and the balance you get when you ride short is just so different than when you ride long. And once your body gets the hang of that in cross-country, it's a really, it's like skiing.
It is. That's probably why, Andrew, you and I ended up using similar saddles, because there weren't many saddles when you were eventing, and there was a limited amount when I was eventing that would go short enough. I wanted to be able to stand really, really clear of my saddle. And that was because of all that balance training that we did with the racehorses and hack racing, etc.
Yeah.
So if I talk about why you stayed in horses, what you really loved, it was at the speed then, the jumping, the speed. Was that what the main thing that you really loved in the beginning?
You go first, Andrew.
Not really. I liked everything about it. I liked the interaction as well
Yeah.
with the horses, but the speed was certainly part of it. But I loved the jumping as well. But, we didn't. Our father used to try and coach us jumping because he was a show jumper. Mum knew what she was doing too. But, of course, we didn't take any notice of them. If they said, put your legs forward, we'd put our legs back pretty much. We should have listened a lot more than we ever did. We knew everything when we were teenagers.
I would like to disagree with one of the things that we were taught, though. Remember, we had to hold something between our knees and grip with our knees the entire time we were riding at Pony Club. I thought that was a little harsh.
Yeah, it was a penny or something. But our mother used to say, because she worked with Mrs. Coffey in Victoria when she was young, and I think Mrs. Coffey, who's quite famous, one of her famous sayings was "a steel hand in a velvet glove," and it's kind of an interesting expression in the sense that you can be a little strong if you have to, but always with a soft hand, and strong if you need to do a transition, and you need to sometimes say to the horse, "Whoa," but give. And
That's
it's
right.
really helped me in my life understand when I went through eventing, but later on about how the light aids develop.
Yeah, that's right, exactly. And the release of pressure was critical to the process.
Yeah, and if you really make sure that any pressure moment doesn't last for more than one or two strides maximum,
Mm-hmm.
that you go woo and then you give,
Yeah.
it has really extraordinary effects in teaching horses to respond to the light aid. And it's the same for the legs. So yeah, we got a lot of good horsemanship from, that's for sure. A lot of it just from talking around the table, I
Yeah,
suppose.
exactly the conversation we'd have. It's interesting, Andrew, you talk about the release of pressure because although we're talking about the things that we really loved about horses and why we stayed in horses, there was just so many things. And I think one of the crystalline moments for me was that very point you're talking about, is that being able to be quick enough, clear enough, and consistent enough with the pressure, but also being able to do exactly the same with the release. And that, for me, was a life-changing moment when you realise how critical that is.
It makes such a big difference to know that. And the other night I was doing at a meeting, an FEI meeting about ethical training, and I was talking to a lot of trainers in Europe and on the in the FEI world who were at this meeting, and they said to me afterwards that to understand negative reinforcement and the release of pressure and the timing of it, they said it's something that they inherently knew
Mm.
but didn't always know it in words. And I think that's the benefit of education is that you can break things down and make it more understandable for people. And so for actually Jonna and I, it's been the key to us and for teaching, and
It's really cool.
it's made such a huge difference because it works in every situation, even negative reinforcement, even when you're trying to catch a horse,
Mm.
is
Yep.
part of it.
Yep.
If you walk towards the horse and the horse goes to move away from you, you immediately should stop and take a step backwards. And so by removing the pressure of you walking towards it, you reinforce the horse staying still or even coming to you. Head shy horses are made through not releasing the pressure mostly. That's the most common thing, where people, if you go to touch the horse's ears and then the horse moves his head, if you take your hand away the instant he's still, you can retrain that.
Yes.
So it's not
Yes.
just the reins and the legs and the whip, it's everything that can be learned. And then you learn that the whip doesn't need to and shouldn't be used for punishment.
Well, exactly.
Use it in a tapping motion to train a horse to just move.
It's an extension of your hand.
And
Yeah. And
becomes lighter if you do it well.
that's right. And I think, Andrew, those points that you raised and us inherently knowing that, and then you being able to describe it from a scientific perspective and put it into very clear language for everybody, that whole process, not just for them, but for me, was really one of those times that you think to yourself, the reason I really love doing this is because I know how well this works and it's just not difficult if you know those things. And when things are hard and you get bashed about and knocked about, whereas Andrew and I, for me, all my injuries have been on the ground.
It won't too. I'm very lucky. I don't carry a single injury from breaking horses full time for many years, as Jonna has, or any kind of
That's
horse
right.
injury. Except I did break my toe when a horse stood on me in Hobart, but
Yeah,
the other ones are all my own ridiculous misadventures in other areas, like falling off
that's right.
ladders and things.
Yeah, exactly.
Before I ask the next question, I'd like to remind everyone about the Diploma of Equestrian Coaching, which is one of the 5 instructor courses you can enrol in at International Horse College. The diploma course is ideal for experienced instructors who are already qualified, and this course aligns with equestrian coaching certification. So as a diploma course, it can also give you university entry, and we'd love to chat with you about those options. But if you're just starting your career or more interested in a different type of horse course, an instructor course or horse management or whatever, please contact us. Simply go to International Horse College, check out the career strategy session at no cost to you, or email us at info@internationalhorsecollege.com for some more information. Now, back to that question. So I'm just thinking about you guys, you did a fair bit of stuff as young kids, because a lot of young kids, it's like they're hanging on to the mane and they're just not wanting to let go. So at some stage, you must have done something a little bit scary. Have you got any stories of just the scariest thing that you remember, like at all? It might have been when you were very young. It may have been when you're a bit older. It may have been you weren't scared when you were a kid. And then just all of a sudden, everyone gets a little bit scared when they do something and then maybe think, oh, maybe I shouldn't have done that. Is there anything you've got there? Any stories?
Can I go first on this one?
Yeah,
And I'll keep it really brief. I was employed to transport 3 horses to Indonesia by ship from Melbourne.
Okay.
And they were young horses. I'd broken them in, and I was asked if I would escort them by ship. And it's a very, very long trip. It's 22 days by ship. Anyway, we had a bit of a problem with the ship's engine room where the engine room caught fire, and we had to use an auxiliary engine, and there was a big sea travelling at the time. One of the horses got washed out of its
Oh, no.
container, and it got flushed out of there. So when we did end up getting the horse back into there, one of the problems was that the tarpaulin that was on there was flapping, and it was just scaring the horses so much. So that is the scariest thing that I've ever done in my life, leaping off the top of another container above the horses on a piece of carpet to pin down the plastic so it wouldn't flap anymore, so the other horses didn't get washed overboard. That's the most difficult thing I've ever done in my life.
Yeah, now that reminds me, and I think, like John, I don't ever recall being scared with a horse because the thing about our father that was really so great about him, we've tried to do the same thing with our own children, but we had to tone it down a lot, is that he was a massive risk taker.
Oh,
So
yeah.
on Guy Fawkes night, we didn't just have crackers. He made us settle in
We had
bombs,
explosives.
balloons. He built us cannons where we could put rocks in and blast things in a 2-inch pipe. The stories here, there were so many. But
Don't end that, Andrew, because I can remember that every Sunday, I loved Sunday because Dad would go to the tip and he would let us practice doing wheelies in his car so we could learn to control cars when they went sideways and backwards. And we thought that was normal.
I was taking Mum shopping when I was about 15, and we just rang up because we had a telephone line that had an operator. We just rang up the operator and say, do you know where the police are right now? And they'd say, yeah, no, they're over at Grassy. So, right, no problems. I can take Mum shopping and drive Dad home from the pub when he was half pissed.
Yeah.
And these sorts of things. But the one story I had that's a bit similar to Jonna's is when I sold Woodmount Magic in 1995. He went across with 30 other shuttle stallions because Woodmount Magic was a thoroughbred stallion, and I sold him to a guy in England called Tim Collins. And so Tim said, look, you can go with the horse. And I thought, well, that would be great. And he said, and then when you get to England, you can show me how you've trained him. So I flew with Magic with these 30 shuttle stallions, and it was the long way around the planet, really, because it was going, first of all, went Melbourne, Sydney, Sydney, Auckland, Auckland, Honolulu, Honolulu, New York, and then New York to Shannon in Ireland. And then the idea was to go across the Irish Sea. This was in a gutted out DC 10, so you couldn't see out the windows. And as we were flying over the Irish Sea that year, there were really crazy storms with boats getting wrecked and whatever. And we didn't know about this, but the captain came to the back of the plane where all the horses were. And in those days, too, they weren't in proper, metal containers. They were just in marine ply with little studs and then a thing over their neck to stop them jumping out. And they were amazingly good. But it got really rough, and the captain came to see myself and the other 11 grooms and said, it looks like we're heading towards, it seems like a hurricane over the Irish Sea. My suggestion is we don't land in Shannon in Ireland. We go and we land in Amsterdam because this Martinair was a Dutch company. And I thought that sounds very sensible. And the Irish grooms, because they do this all the time, they didn't want to. And so the head groom said to me, listen here, laddie, it's the hurricanes they don't tell you about. They're the bad ones.
Oh, really?
That
Wow.
sounds like Irish logic to me.
Uh-huh.
I mean, when we landed,
Really?
horses were going up and down, and
Oh, yeah.
we finally got there, and it was January, so really hot in Australia. So poor old Magic had just a summer coat, and I just had a woolen rug for him, but like an under rug. And when we got out of the plane, it was really cold, and I think he got quite a shock. But anyway, we got there safe and sound. I know another one too when Warwick wanted Alessandro in England because he was working for Kira Kirkland, and so we arranged for Alessandro to go to England. And so I thought I'll go with this horse. He was a stallion as well, and they let me go as a travelling groom because I'd had the experience. And that it was a very interesting experience. But when I got to Dubai, that's when the volcano erupted, just exactly that day. So all airlines shut down in the world. So I ended up having a free holiday in Dubai at the expense of Singapore Airlines. And Singapore Airlines paid for the horse to be stabled all that time. I'm forever grateful. And so I do support Singapore Airlines when I can because it was a fantastic thing that they did. Um, without any, I didn't ever receive any charge for my hotel bills or meals or anything. But I just remember how stinking hot it was. It was over 50 degrees
Yeah, that's
some
right.
day.
Yeah.
So, at what stage then, learning about your childhood and your wonderful memories, at what stage then did you sort of go separate ways? When I say go separate ways, just have interests in other areas. Or, like, was it when you left school, did you work with horses or did you do more study? Or tell us a bit how you went into different facets and became experts, like you obviously were dedicated, but just to go into these different areas within the horse industry.
I probably started being exposed to racing earlier than Andrew, and so that was always a conduit for me. But I was really fascinated with eventing, and it was Andrew's influence and Pony Club and Mum and Dad that really gave me that as well. And I love doing both. I love mixing both. And I probably started with racing at a younger age than Andrew, but Andrew and I have had racehorses together before, and we've both trained racehorses, and we both spent a lot of time training and retraining racehorses together as well.
Mm-hmm.
And mine was more about, I mean, I've always been pretty keen on, I'm mad keen on animals. And so I always had lots of pets and, ferrets and ducks and God knows what. And Mum taught me how to train them. So from an early age, she thought you shouldn't really have an animal unless you actually trained it to do things.
Yep.
And in a sense, that's really right, because if you do teach animals things and you're really clear with your system of, reward, and however you reward them, and they recognise that, it really gives them a stable life, because their life is controllable and predictable. And anyway, that was that. So I went to uni and did zoology, and then I was teaching zoology at the uni in the north of Tasmania. But at the same time, I was keen on eventing, and I didn't really get into racing. And then Jonna came to my place, and then we both worked together. And then we had a few. Because he's interested in racing, and we raced a few horses together. I had an owner trainer's license, and Woodmount Magic was also. I got him as a weanling, so I never owned him in the beginning. The owner said, no, this horse is bred to win the Melbourne Cup. You can't go eventing this horse. But I really wanted him as an event horse. So I said I'd get an owner trainer's license. So I did, raced him. I didn't win any races with him. It was terrible. So I got into
It's
trouble for
embarrassing.
being such a terrible race trainer. But as it was, then the owner said, let's send him to Michael Trinder. And Michael Trinder's a very good trainer. And this horse, he needed distance. He couldn't sprint, and all the races for young horses were sprinters. In fact, the longest race in Tasmania is on King Island. It's the ladies' race that I think it is at 2,600 metres. So, no race was long enough for that horse.
No, that's right.
Galloping, he was good.
He was an absolute dyed-in-the-wool stayer, that horse, all day, which made him such a blinding, great performing, relaxed event horse, because he conserved energy. He didn't gallop with any tension at all. He would just lob along and go at whatever tempo you set, and away you went like an automatic car.
Yeah, and he's a really nice personality too.
Yeah, easy to work with. Yeah.
Very, very easy, unflappable sort of a horse. Jonna was working breeding horses at a stud, so he was helping me with those things at our place. And Magic, we could have the mare ready, holding her one, and then just open the gate and just put her hand and say, no, wait.
Wait.
Would wait, and then he would serve the mare. So yeah, he was a very, very nice horse. It was sad to sell him, but it did help me pay for the farm
Yeah,
that I had.
that would have been difficult.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was tough.
So we think about learning, and what's the saying? If you're on the shoulders of the giants that walk before you, to have a mentor, to have people that you learn from. And this is, obviously I want you to go one at a time. I want to know, Jonna, what have you learned from Andrew? And then Andrew, what have you learned from Jonna?
Oh, I think probably the biggest thing that I learnt from Andrew was his passion, not just with horses, but with animals and nature. That was probably the very first lesson, like his inquisitiveness down at the beach and in the ocean, or it didn't matter where we were, and looking for the finer details. Now, that also triggered my interest in geology as well, because it made me observant. So that's definitely a big part of it. And of course, being exposed to the wisdom of our parents and Andrew's doings with horses just generally, and then later on, obviously to do with racing and eventing. So that was a massive part of it. It's, chapters of my life, not just a chapter. And I think that the other it's really hard. There's so many people in my life that have had an influence. I go back to King Island and thinking about my brother Pete. So Pete was the person, he was the catalyst for my interest in racing. There's no doubt about that. And that was also triggered partially by Andrew because he invited me to participate in hack races. So it was both Andrew and Peter. And then another very good friend of mine that Andrew's already mentioned before, Peter Clark. He, very patient man, very good with horses, just has really good timing. He probably doesn't even understand or couldn't describe why, but he just does. There's so many people. Yeah, so many people. And also teaching from a teaching point of view as well. Andrew was teaching as a professional teacher before he was breaking in, and seeing that also helped me understand the critical responsibility that we have between horses and people. It's all very well to say, I'll train your horse to do this, but being able to convey the how, when, and why is a real art. And that was my passion for teaching, and Andrew's obviously part of that. But there are so many people in that sphere as well from a teaching point of view because, as event riders, we had lessons all the time from professionals all around the country in our squad training, and you would think, oh, well, that's a really good way of doing that. That's fantastic. I wonder how he or she knew that. So you pick up all these little bits and pieces, and then you put that into your profile, and that's how we both ended up becoming professional coaches as well on top of it. So, yeah.
Yeah. You say that and you talk about the connection. You're not just training the horse, you're training the rider for the horse. But then, as a rider, if you're just a rider, just a trainer, there's a certain amount of hours per day and you can do a certain amount. But if you then go, well, I'm going to train this rider to continue on with this horse, that sort of multiplies. You've got the leverage there.
Well, that's right.
And, being a coach educator, you think, I'm going to train this coach to train these people to train those horses. And it's just magic, just the leverage you get from that.
Absolutely. I'm very interested to hear what Andrew is going to say now when, here we go.
Yeah.
I'm the older brother, so, it's a sort of a different dynamic. And also our parents they died when we were quite young. When we moved to King Island, they didn't last long for various reasons. Their health deteriorated. I think we went there for that reason to make a better life. And they both drank a lot. And so Jonna was only just out of school. Nigel was still in school. So, in a way, I was a bit like a parent as well. But the thing is, I worked with Jonna so much, and really, he always brought the fun into it, and bravery and general interest in training and enthusiasm, and particularly racing. I learned a lot from Jonna there because Jonna worked for Luca Camani in England, and Luca was a child prodigy trainer.
Yeah, absolutely.
An extraordinary person. I interviewed him once, and in the interview, he wanted to know more about me than I could barely get enough out of him, and I had to keep saying, no, I want to hear you. How about you? Because he was interested in interval training, and so he taught me a little bit there, and then he said, look, if there are places here where people can work. And I said, well, I've got a younger brother, Jonathan. He might be interested. So Jonna went there and worked for him for quite a while and then came back with a lot of knowledge. And so we had an owner trainer's license, and we both trained the horse together what's it called, Baron Bemboka or something. He'd never won a race. And in Launceston, and as soon as Jonna came back after we just been and done a few weeks, and next thing we won a race in Launceston. So that was really exciting to win that first race. And Jonna kept on going with his interest in horses, in racehorses. And I did a little bit, but not so much because I was really keen to go ahead eventing. But the people that really influenced me in terms of the way I was starting horses, in particular, Kel Jeffrey. Now, I never met him, and he died a long time before then. I think he may have died in the 50s. He was 90. But friends of mine in Tasmania called the Osborne family had a farm called Taranaki. So during my SWAT vac and other times, I would go there and just stay with them because I didn't really want to study much. I just needed to, do the M and be with horses. And they rode eventing and they did all sorts of things. But Bill Osborne was a very good trainer of young horses. And I had this sort of moment where on the one hand, I saw a guy on King Island breaking in horses, and it was pretty rough. And it started off with a horse that I knew as a young horse that was pretty calm. It seemed to me all you have to do was get on it, and it became really nervous. But when I saw Bill Osborne breaking in, I saw him start with a really nervous horse and end up with a calm one. And I said, "What's this all about?" He said, "It's the Jeffrey method." So he showed me a few things, and then I bought the book. And when I went back from my school holidays to King Island, I just basically had the book in one hand and the horse in the other, and it was really quite successful. So through the Jeffrey method, John and I both did that. We still start horses bareback and all those things. Nothing's changed, and so do all our pupils. Matt Laurie's a race trainer. He still does that. They do. The other one that was a big influence, but also I didn't know, but I know of his work, was Tom Roberts, and he made so much sense. And anybody who's interested in knowing about horses should read his books.
Absolutely, a must read.
So they were the two big standouts for me as a young trainer.
Andrew, you're very involved in Pony Club now. Did either of you have like a highlight of your career in Pony Club? Can you talk about that?
My highlight was, I didn't own my first horse until I went to Ag College because people would just give me horses to ride. So I was very lucky.
Okay.
But one of the horses that I was able to ride, which was pretty much my second horse, was a jumping horse called Fashion. He was a lovely horse, a skewbald horse on King Island. Sorry?
Hack races for you. He was fast. He won hack races for you too.
Yeah, won hack races with him. And it's funny because although the hack races probably should make a really memorable moment, I think that all of a sudden when you get exposed to ribbons, and so when winning champion junior show jumper was probably, and I think my younger brother Nigel was reserve actually many, many years ago, made an impression on me. And I remember that vividly and thinking to myself, wow, I'm the best of my, even if it was only King Island Pony Club, still amongst a lot of people, though. I mean, that pony club was quite big then, Andrew, wasn't it? It was not small. So there was still a fair bit of competition out there. But winning ribbons was a completely different aspect that I wasn't ready for, and I remember that vividly. Yeah.
What about you, Andrew? Have you got a highlight in your career in Pony Club?
Well, I really enjoyed Pony Club. It was more the fun and the being with friends and communal interests. I really enjoyed it. We had such a lot of fun at Pony Club camp and that sort of thing. And because we got up to a lot of mischief too, because we'd always have a visiting instructor for the Pony Club camp, and we did all sorts of things like put a snake in the bedroom and that sort of thing. And one time we put a kangaroo in the bedroom and shut the door. The visiting instructor. They all had a pretty good sense of humour, and we used to take them out galloping kangaroos, and some of them had not had that kind of life. These instructors, they were young, but they hadn't really done that, and they were sometimes a little surprised that we were jumping barbed wire fences, and one of them, I remember Susan Turner Davis, who's now a coach up in Queensland, and New South Wales actually. She's yes, I should say. So she became a really close friend, and she was our visiting instructor, and we said to her on this chasing kangaroo business at Pony Club camp, jump this wire fence, and she said, "I'm not jumping that. It's rusty old barbed wire." So we put a stick on it and made it
feel better.
but it was just really the enjoyment and the fun. I mean, that's what Pony Club is, really a great organisation for kids learning to be caring. There's no better place to learn to have empathy, even and that translates to people in the end too. But also to ride well and know a lot about horses. And I worry for the kids that don't do Pony Club but end up riding, for the young riders, because they don't learn enough horsemanship. And you see that they can't even tie a hay net up and properly, that sort of thing. So that's the bit I really enjoyed, was just the fun part.
I totally agree, Andrew. I think the camaraderie, and Andrew was talking about pony camp, we used to sneak out in the middle of the night and get our horses and then go for a private race around the racetrack, stuff like that. And I don't ever remember as a kid getting off my horse and opening a gate, and the main reason was I could get on it, but I had to really clamber and put in a lot of effort to get back on it bareback again, so it was easy just to jump the barbed wire fence.
Yeah. My grandfather told me if I was ever going to jump barbed wire fence to make sure I jumped it where the post was.
Yeah,
so
that's
that
right.
at
That's
least
right.
the horse could see,
Yeah.
where
We
he
had a
could
lot of
jump it.
box-thorn hedges on King Island, so that
Yeah.
made it
Made it
often over
Okay.
Yeah.
fine, so that
Yep.
made it easier,
Yep.
but sometimes it made it reasonably big too. But when you're
Yep.
young, you don't ever think that it's too big.
And that's a message to our listeners too. Don't go jumping posts over barbed
No.
wire fences.
No.
No,
Stay away from them. This is like back a
role
long
model
time
in
ago.
that
Yeah.
regard.
Yeah.
My friend Brett Thorne, he left. He said to me he would like to do his B test on from the King Island Pony Club, and he'd have to go to Launceston to do it. And I said, I'm not doing that. I'm not interested. And so he went, and he got himself a girlfriend and had all these. Because King Island was half boys and half girls in the pony club, but where he went to Tas Pony and Riding Club, he was the only boy amongst 30 odd girls, and came back to King Island having failed his B test
Oh no.
and
Had a girlfriend.
the girlfriend. And so he had to do another go at it. And I said, well, I'll do my B test. So I went with him. And then we both, because we had never ridden dressage, so I was riding the chief instructor of the pony club, her what I thought was a fancy trained horse called Hiawatha. And my horse didn't even go on the bit at all, the half trotter from King Island, and Hiawatha did, and so I had a lot to learn, and so we both failed our B test again, and the daughter of the chief instructor said, "You can't do that to these boys from King Island. That's not fair." So actually, we got the first lower passes of the B.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
Okay.
created the first lower pass. Yeah. Oh, and that's not talking about Andrew can probably vividly remember you had to have your C test to compete at the trials, which are the Pony Club Championships, and so I had to do my C test, and yeah, I was very very young, and I can remember some of the answers that I submitted. I can't believe that I passed with the answers that I gave. Yeah, stories.
Yes, we had a good time, and King Island was just great for us. It was a really good start, and I think I would never have been able to do what I do in eventing, what I did in eventing, without that good start, because nothing in eventing ever seemed like a big fence. And yet, in those days, jumping advanced 3-day events at Gawler and places like that, those fences were big and they weren't necessarily safe. It was more of a test, but I never had a feeling that it was a bad idea at that stage.
Jonna, after Pony Club,
Yeah.
what do you think would be the highlight of your career? And you can mention a few things if you like, or just, if you've got one that
I
stands
think,
out.
yeah, and it doesn't involve me riding, but it involved me training a lot. I was breaking in horses. I was contracted to break in horses with the Hong Kong Jockey Club with Peter Clark under the supervision of Peter Clark at Nagambie. And so I commenced that and had a group of horses. I think I had 18 horses, and I asked if I could open up the stables, and I opened up the stables to outsiders, and I ended up with 40. And we did those horses in about 8.5 weeks, and all those horses needed to be able to ride in a pad, walk, trot and canter, and jump out of the barriers and do basic track work skills. And one of the horses that we then put on a plane and took to Hong Kong ended up being the highest priced horse. So having a horse that I broke in, pre-trained, road track work, had it on a plane, and then did our breeze ups with it, then led it through the sale ring, and then for it to become the highest priced horse and then be on the front page of the China Daily was probably pretty close to it. Yeah. And the reason that photo was taken was because he was rearing and he'd lifted me off the ground about probably 2.5 feet. So I was actually airborne when the photographer took the photo. It was quite spectacular. I still have that photo. And probably a non-racing one was we had one of our first 3-star events ever at Spray Farm, which is down the Bellarine Peninsula. And it was a very, very challenging course. You remember that course too, Andrew, probably.
Yeah.
And very difficult. Not many people finished. And even though I had 2 stops, I completed the course. So that to me was legendary because that was a tough track. That was a very, very tough track. That's the toughest track I've ever had the challenge to go before. And that was actually on a horse that Andrew had lent me as well. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. What about you, Andrew?
Well, I think, and I mean, a lot of, I just remember the enjoyment of riding and jumping. For me, that all through my career, that's been a highlight of in that part of my life of of training and riding, eventing and show jumping. And I remember Hobart Royal and winning there. And when my horse Sam got into the Grand Prix in Launceston Show, that was a highlight. But probably in my eventing life, I guess winning Wandon Advanced and Gawler was really the pinnacle of my career in eventing. Just really enjoyed the whole scene of eventing. It was, but it's different now, and it was too tough then on horses, that's for sure. But I think eventing's made a good series of changes to make it much. They've gone further than any other discipline in making their sport better and safer for horses.
Yes. Yep.
In
Yep.
fact, I even really like the dressage in eventing. I prefer to watch it than proper dressage.
Proper
I think that
dressage, I'd agree with that.
Yep.
Absolutely.
it's nice
Yep.
horsemanship.
It is. It flows. It seems to. There's not as much tension, I don't think.
And we always competed on horses that we trained ourselves, and I still think that's important. So I think people who, in the Olympics and events like that, they should really be on horses they train themselves. It's too much of a money market now where you've got enough money, you can buy the best horse, and if you can ride really well, you can get better and better, and you can fast track your way to the top, at least to be near the top. Whereas you can't do that in other sports. You can't just buy a great tennis racket and win,
No, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
get into
Yeah.
Wimbledon at least. So I think that's how I would like to see it.
Because, when you break in, as Andrew and I have both done on many horses, break in and train your horse, and whether you win, Wandon or Melbourne 3-day or a big race, there's a huge amount of connection that you have with that horse because you've spent hours and hours doing this with them. So, it goes beyond horsemanship. It's almost, they're your pet, they're part of your family, they're part of your being.
You both had quite a few horses to train over the time that you've been around, and like you've taught a lot of people, trained a lot of horses. But you get to train, and I'm sure you would have had horses that no one else wants, dangerous, difficult horses. How do you approach them? Because some of them are pretty scary.
We had two at one time,
Yeah.
remember?
Yeah, absolutely.
The horse you had called Thomas, and I had
Thomas, that's
Woodmount
right.
Orbit.
Exactly.
Both of them
Yep.
got because they were problems.
Yep.
So mine was a rearer and Jonna's was a bucker,
One
I
was a
think.
bucker, that's right. No.
I do remember thinking I'd solved the problem of rearing and going to the one-day event at Geelong and getting stuck under some low trees where the horse did start to rear. And there's not much you can do when you're rearing in low branches.
And most of our horses, there were so many good horses that came to us, and their progeny is still about, that they were just simply given to us because the people didn't want to have anything to do with them. They were dangerous because they'd hurt somebody or scared somebody or injured somebody. So we would inherit these horses and just take them on, and they just become part of our stable. And some of those turned out to be pretty nice horses, which is part of the reason why in my eventing competition career I didn't ever have any horses. I bred one horse. That was the only horse I ever bred. All the others were either given to me or they just came along. It didn't matter whether they were black, white, what breed they were, or how tall they were, or anything like that. It was just the challenge of being able to save a horse and value add it. And some of those horses turned out to be pretty good for both of us.
And throughout those careers that we had at the Australian Equine Behaviour Centre too, the AEBC, we helped. So we had a caseload of 20, 25 horses there. Some were there for starting, but many of them were there for behaviour problems, and it was a really interesting learning ground about behaviour problems. Because I was doing my PhD at the same time, so learning to transport this knowledge into horses and help horses that had behaviour problems was massive. And so a lot of horses that, because it's all when people often say, "Oh, that's all you have to do is teach the riders to ride well." It's not true. Sometimes you do, and in fact, in all cases, you have to be involved with the rider. There's no doubt. But horses are very much habit-driven animals, and once they learn a bad habit, they'll stick with it if it profits them. Which is Tom Roberts speaking.
Yes. Yes.
It's reinforcing for them when they suddenly, if they can release pressure in a way that they don't want. And so the onus is then on the rider to ride them better. And often riders, and they still do come to us where they're just taught to drive the horse into the hand And horses object to that, and many of them start to show behaviour problems, and who wouldn't? And teaching people to ride in self-carriage and lighter is a really important thing. If most behaviour problems would be solved if people did do that, if the horses were in self-carriage. Horses are an amazingly docile creature. Amazing that you can do so much with them if you just do the right thing by them. But people rarely turn the mirror to themselves and look at themselves. They'll tend to blame the horse's character or its breeding or someone else who had the horse, but not themselves. And we just need to improve. And particularly now, because of these times where there's a lot of scrutiny in the horse industry from the public, because everybody's got a mobile phone and cameras and people are on social media. And so it's really changing now. And so now the pressure is really on to do a lot better. And I really hope we do. And so that's where I am at the moment, is trying to get these changes through. And it's not easy, but I think if people learned, for example, if horses are really strong in the mouth, as people say, if you do enough downward transitions and you get your timing right, the horses then stay in a rhythm and they stay in your speed until asked to go faster. And most horses that shy have a turn problem, but people rarely ever recognise that. But most horses tend to shy left anyway, not right. And most of them are hollow left and stiff right. And what that means is the right turn is heavy and delayed, and the left turns are typically hollow and empty and delayed. So I think teaching people all the basics, and this goes right back to the federations and where we're so lucky being Australians, because in the sense that, as Australians, we live in a culture where we don't really have a culture, so we question everything. And that's been the same for us with horses, is, we didn't accept it. We said, we queried it. And now they're beginning to listen in Europe a lot because they need
Yep.
to do
Yep.
that.
Hmm.
And I just wanted to underline one of the things that Andrew just mentioned, which has probably been the most rewarding quest that I've had, is understanding the importance of self-carriage, and not just with horses as well. I mean, it could be, leading your dog and all sorts of things you can apply it to. But the principle behind it is being able to train it to that level where there's no pressure involved. And that is just such a unique, fantastic place to be. It doesn't matter whether you're riding a racehorse or an eventing horse or a dressage horse, but to have that is not common yet. And
No, you should be able to let go of the reins in certain dressage, and the horse stays in his speed, stays in his outline, uh, stays on your line, and or one rein or the other on a curved line. If you let go of your inside rein, the horse drifts to the left, then there's a fault in your right turn. And it's really that simple. And so for me, it's a lot of it's questioning the German training scale. I'm not a believer in that because it's not a scale, and I know the history of it. It's a set of directives, and some of them are very good, but it's not a scale like a scientist or a musician would see a scale. It doesn't start at
Yep.
one point and
Yep.
end at another.
Yep.
Because if it did, it would start at a basic attempt and even obedience, which is what impulsion used to mean, but like immediate reaction from a light aid. It should really start there, so it causes problems in judging, because say if the horse is doing piaffe but he doesn't do it, well then there's no basic attempt. But it's that it starts at rhythm. So the German scale. So I just think there's a lot of things that need questioning. But typically, as Jonna said, in self carriage, if we only understood the depth of that, and I realise that in show jumping, yes, you do. It's much better for the horses jumping if they draw to the fence. But all that means is that if you let the reins go, he will gradually get faster, or his tempo will increase, or his stride length, depending how you do it. But generally, it would be better for horse welfare if we really adopted self carriage. So now it's more important than ever.
And I'd like to add exactly the same of what Andrew said, but put it into racing. How many of racehorses that have shown to be really, really talented that probably ended up pulling way too hard, especially in these distance races, could have been absolute mind-blowing champions, could have been the black caviars of the world if they'd started and had implemented and ingrained self-carriage from the start.
Hmm. And I think there's been very good trainers that have stumbled across these ideas themselves, and they implicitly know things. But that's the beauty of understanding all the basics and the basic responses and how they build up into a movement or whatever you want. Any sport is being able to lay it all out on the table and say, this is the fault here. And it's nearly always to do with the basics. And I remember Mackay Diva, when she won the Melbourne Cup, and it was just so impressive that the jockey threw the reins away and and threw his hands in the air, and the horse just stayed put, stayed, as we call it, in the park. And I remember Lonhro winning the Australia Cup when the jockey opened his right rein, the horse pulled out to the right, and then he just accelerated. If in every sport, if people learned more about training, it would be a huge advantage. But as I said, self-carriage is really critical right now because it's a really serious welfare issue if horses are all in a heavy contact.
Mm,
It's
mm.
not good for horses. And when people say, well, it's over the back and it's through and all of these narratives that they have, look, if it's not good for horses, it's just not good for horses.
But all those narratives are really only pointing to one thing. They're not willing to look at themselves. And that's what we need to do. We need to be more humble in our approach, and it will lead us to the right answer.
Yeah. The answers are there, I think.
Yeah, they are.
I think you two have great conversations, just to be at your dinner table. It's just, yeah. I'm going to go back to the question that I asked you a couple of minutes ago, and I'm going to summarize into what I think the answer was because we sort of moved around a bit there. So I asked you about dealing with fear, having difficult horses, difficult circumstances, and training dangerous and difficult horses. Now, is it that you are able to deal with your fear, or that you step back and have a look at the horse and say, right, first of all, I'm going to reward the try. If the horse is trying, then that's just the first scale, and then build from there. Is it that you're saying that if you're retraining dangerous and difficult horses, that you're just going right back to the basics and giving the horses the opportunity to tell you what's wrong? Is that what you're saying, or have I got it wrong?
Well, can I go first, Andrew? And mine might take long because for me it's relatively easy. It comes back to first principles. You focus on the first principles. And so then you look at that and then you say, all right, now that I've done that point, I need to go to the second one. And then you go to the second one, and then the following day you might come back and check your work. So the entire time, Glenys, you're not really scared because you're actually focused on outcomes. So it's you're training. You've trained yourself that you've become automatic to be so observant for all the little things, all the little signals, and then come back and then say, now is it replicatable? Is it replicatable in different contexts, etc., etc.? So you're so preoccupied with the tasks or task that you're training that you're not scared because in the end, you'll end up with a quite predictable horse because that's how it works. How would you say, Andrew?
Yeah, I think so. I think you're right there. Like knowing what you're doing and having a plan is really important. If you just get on a ride, I can imagine being scared because you sort of, it's a pretty empty world just waiting to see what happens or whatever if you don't really have a plan. And many people don't. They just ride and they don't do transitions. And transitions are essential. People should do hundreds of transitions because it tells you about the horse's training. It tells you what he knows about the basics of, deceleration, acceleration, and turning and yielding. So that's one thing. And I think also when it comes to fear, I think a lot of it's to do with people are more risk averse nowadays than they used to be. We lived in an environment where just weren't, and none were the other kids in Pony Club, girls and boys. We all did all sorts of things. We used to jump the running rail, and nobody said it was a bad idea. So when you get in your head that something's scary, you think of it more in a negative way. So I think people's estimation of risk is really important to reflect on because most people estimate risks to be much worse than they actually are.
True.
In the sense that, if the horse does something that scares them, like a little rearing is a good one because many horses that we had to train for people and help them were not really rearers. They just popped off the ground a little bit. But people's estimation of risk is different. And so I actually really think about that with my grandchildren. I teach them to have a really honest estimation of risk.
Yes, a realistic
Because,
estimation of risk.
yeah, because I know it's easy to not think that way.
Yeah. It was interesting we talk about risk because our mother used to say, and that made me think of our mum. And
She was very relaxed.
she was very relaxed, and we would do something completely ridiculous. And then, in her really quiet, mannered way, with a little pause, she would say, "Do you think that's wise?"
Yeah, that's all she
Yeah.
would say.
That's it.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
That's all it took for us to look at ourselves a little bit. Yeah,
Mostly we think it was pretty wise, though. We just kept on doing
we
it.
did. Yeah, we didn't.
I certainly don't think either of us had that much that we found really scary. We just had to work out ways of dealing with it. And some horses, if you estimate risk in a realistic way, there's some horses where you're not going to get on. It's just ridiculous idea to get on. So you do groundwork, and retrain the horse from the start and go back over all its basics.
Hmm.
Because the moment you start feeling heroic, you'll be injured, and you shouldn't be in that position. So no one should ever be in that position.
What about if we're going to summarise? And this is certainly not meaning that your careers are over. That's for sure. We want you to both be around for quite a few years to come. But if we're going to summarise, the most enjoyable part of your professional career with horses, can we get an answer from both of you? What you've enjoyed most? Because people talk about careers with horses, and some people start to say, "Well, there's no money in horses," and I'd have to challenge that, but sometimes you've got to say, well, is it about the money or is it about the lifestyle and the enjoyment, and what is it that you really want? Yeah.
I think when you do things for money, it's not, you're always starting wrong.
Exactly. Yep.
So I think it's really important to focus on what you enjoy in life, and I think that's true for anybody. If they have something they really enjoy a lot, you can probably make a life of that.
Exactly.
For
Yep.
me, the most enjoyable parts was starting young horses. I just loved that. In the early days, I was on my own, and our house was 100 metres from my yards. And Manuela, my wife, was teaching at primary school, and I would have Warwick in the back of the ute. And I was just training, and I was breaking in 12 to 14 horses every day. And I just loved that life. It was just so nice. And as I said, the Jeffrey method really was my backstay because I just never got hurt doing it. And the horses very quickly became we had horses there in Tasmania that came from big stations. When I say big station, not like like Queensland, but 100, Conneville and Benham, 60,000 acres, 100,000 acres. I hadn't seen people before and just dumped in the yards. And that was interesting and challenging, but how quickly they became really quite confident with people. And that's the bit I remember most, and I really enjoy that. For me now, it's just I have a thoroughbred that I like a lot, that I ride him every second day, and I really enjoy just the contact with him.
Hmm. Hmm.
For me, it's a really easy one. Is that when Andrew and Menu first moved to the mainland here, and we moved to Clonbinane, that we were building Andrew's house and various other projects, and we were riding our 12 to 15 horses a day. And then once we get the horses going in the yards, going well in the yards, the very first thing we'd do is take them out on a bush ride, and taking those horses out on a ride together, riding in the bush, getting them to go places confidently, not letting them get scared, but just getting them to the point where they become really trustworthy of your guidance, and then also getting, well, a bonus, you're getting paid to do that as a job, and then seeing how those horses then transpire into eventing horses or race horses or dressage horses is so rewarding. And probably the other thing is the hours and hours that we've spent sitting around the table discussing what we think, our perspective, our take on what happened today. What could we do better? How can we make this easier for the horse to understand? All those brainstorming discussions, I think that to me was critical.
Yeah, and the pony camps that we had for kids, they were such good fun. And because it was a little, looser in those days, we used to take the children when we were up at Clonbinane, and we did the same in Tasmania when we lived there too. But when we moved to Victoria, we'd take them on these rides in pony camp, and really fun rides through the bush where we'd canter and we'd go into places and cross creeks and things and a lot of kids loved that. And I think a lot of children went on to become good riders. from having those essential sort of skills.
And the other thing that was Andrew's talking about having fun is we got to the point where, we became known as a really fun pony camp. And so we would be teaching the kids to ride bareback and then jump bareback and then fall off your horse successfully at walk, trot and canter. We did so many things that pushed so many boundaries that even people walk up to me today and say, oh, wow, I remember I came out to your pony camps when I was X age and I did this and I jumped over these jumps and I was bareback and then you taught us how to fall off and we had such a fun time on the bush ride. That's what it's all about. It should be all about having fun, really.
And do you remember, you can tell that story, Jonna, when we first moved to Victoria, to Clonmernane, and we had this fantastic family of great horsemen living right next door to us, the Wallace family. One of them had been an Australian champion bull rider, and the other one, Bernie Wallace, I think he was third or something in Calgary, and you had to sit on a horse. And so when we first got there, it was a really fun idea, but it was like the McLeans against the Wallaces. So it was really John and I against Bernie and Peter.
It was fantastic.
We did come a bit unstuck when it came to the bull riding, I have to say, because they were, we weren't good at that. John had done a bit more. He'd done a rodeo or two on King Island, but
I was still having a bit of a dabble, but not much.
I'd sat on calves in the yards and things, and young ones. But it was really good fun. So we did all these. So we had games all set up between us and the Wallaces, and we I have to say, even though they had pretty good quarter horses, we had Warwick's pony. Jody was pretty much unbeatable in rescue races. So you'd raced at the end of their arena, their rodeo arena. I'd race there. I'd grab Jonna's hand. He'd swing up behind me bareback, and we'd gallop back.
Canter pass, hook elbows, and on we go. Yep.
Yeah. So we had a lot of fun doing that with the neighbours.
And mustering out the back of Avondale in that really rough country, that was fantastic too. Being able to see scenic places that are inaccessible. Trying to rescue sheep and having over the front of your saddle and pushing them through the bush. Fantastic.
Yes.
I have really enjoyed this chat. It's a lot more interesting than what I thought it would be, because I've talked to both of you before, but we've just brought in so much just extra stuff that I think is great. But is there any questions that I should have asked you, but I didn't?
No, I don't think so. I think you asked all the questions that. That's the thing about horses, isn't it? It takes you through so many different journeys in so many different dimensions. It's a wonderful world. It's a wonderful world.
Yep, for sure. Yep. All right, Andrew, can you give us a bit of an update about elephant news? Because, if anyone's listened to Andrew's previous chats, we often talk about his work with elephants. So just a bit of an update on what you've been doing. And I know it was only sort of a couple of months ago that I chatted to you, but anything else that's happened since then?
Yes, well, again, it was the horse world that brought me into that world of elephants. And again, training whatever species and whatever you want them to do is a kind of a technology, if you can put it into the most basic sense, of course. And then there's, you build confidence and rapport with the animal. And so the Elephant Project has been going really well. And now I've been to Nepal many times, North, South India. John has come with me there, Thailand, Laos, Myanmar. And so this year we decided we've got a very active board on it's an elephant charity. It's a not-for-profit called the HELP Foundation, that stands for Human Elephant Learning Programs Foundation. So that was decided last year, and I wasn't 100% for the idea, but I now know it's the right one, and that is to run an international mahout training camp for elephant trainers, as they're called, mahouts. And so we invited 2 mahouts from all of these countries that have elephants, plus one stakeholder. And so they came. We even had people in the end from Malaysia as well. And it was fantastic to hear them get together and through translators speak about, because they all, when you go there, in India, for example, they're very proud of their ancient elephant tradition. It's as old as riding horses. It's 5,000 or 6,000 years old. And of course, it's been handed down through families and father to son mostly. And so they have their own, feelings of pride with what they do, and they don't really see eye to eye with any other variation of the method. And so I've always been trying to teach them principle, not methodology, because better ones with the methods. I'm not an elephant trainer. I don't have that background, or didn't. And so they're really good about interacting with others and learning from others after the first day. And that enabled us to then get into their heads a bit more and say, okay, well, you can see that every different country has slightly different signals or aids, as you want to call them, with the elephants. And these are the principles that surround, for example, you use negative reinforcement with an elephant to ride it. So your toes on the elephant's ears are your go button, your toes on one ear is your turn button, your heels on backwards on the elephant's shoulders is your stop button and your slow button. And of course, it's more complex and actually teach them to do all sorts of things with the trunk and to lie down and pick up feet. But it all works through the same learning processes. And that's been really interesting for me. And it's helped me really understand more about horses and possibly also to recognize that how ubiquitous this is across the animal kingdom. And when I say possibly, I mean, I'm not all animals learn in these sorts of ways, like we do too. But of course, some animals that are not domesticated, it's a longer journey to train them if they're wild. But certainly with animals that are that we have in our that are domestic animals, it really reveals a lot to transport that to another species.
All right. If anyone's interested in it's a charity, isn't it? Help, HELP. We're going to have a link to that in our page on Horse Chats. So just go to horsechats.com and search for McLean for this one. But if you search for Jonna or search for Andrew, I'm sure you'll find it, and you'll be able to donate through that help link as well, and the work that Andrew's doing with the elephants. But look, I'd just like to say thank you to both of you. I think just wonderful. Great to hear from you. Great to chat to both of you, and great to chat to both of you together. And I think sometimes when you do, I catch up with old friends and I'll say something and they say, yeah, but did you know that? And while this was going on, and everyone's got a different perspective. So, yeah, yep.
But
No, we've had a lot of fun together, and this has been a really fun night for me. So thank you
Oh,
very
great.
much.
I was going to say exactly that, and congratulations to you, Glenys, for getting to your 1000th episode, and the great journey that you and the opportunity that you've given other people as well. You'd be congratulated on that as well. Fantastic effort.
All right. Well, I'll just move on now to the 2000th episode. We'll just sort of keep going and keep. I mean, the main thing is if I've got two things I want to do, it's horse welfare and safety.
Absolutely.